The last and final section, Lake Abundance to Jardine, with my dear longtime friend Rachel, who worked with me on a black bear study in Virginia and was the one who told me about a job doing citizen science programs with a coyote research project in Cooke City that ultimately introduced me to Yellowstone. And she's also the one that introduced George and I while they were both in a graduate program at Virginia Tech. So it was super fitting that she was the one to bring me home. So for the fourth and final section, we started at Lake Abundance. Just some landmarks here. You've got Slough Creek heading out this way, Cutoff Mountain, which we can see from Little America, and right around near the Specimen Ridge pull-off, you can see Cutoff Mountain, and Frenchy Meadow, and then we're headed right over here to the Palmer Trailhead. So started out, let me zoom in a little bit, Lake Abundance, and walked down through mostly burn and crazy scouring from the floods last year, all over the place, blowing out all the creeks. But all the way down to Slough Creek, where we camped just above Frenchy Meadow, which is here. And if you keep going this way, you can see from Frenchy Meadow, there's Cutoff Mountain, which is just one of the coolest peaks ever, and so fascinating to see how steep it is from this side. So from Slough Creek, we moved on up and over to Bull Creek and Bull Creek Pass, which was beautiful deep forests and wonderful country. We had a nice view from Bull Creek Pass, and then we dropped into Buffalo Creek. And the meadows of Buffalo Creek are pretty fantastic. I'll show you those in some images as we go through the slides. So then up and over the Buffalo Plateau, Elk Basin, Telephone Basin was supposed to be our big gorgeous view day, and we got rained in, which was a total bummer, especially for Rachel, I think, who had never been up there, but she was good-hearted and spirited about it. So then we work our way down to Hell Roaring Creek, climb back up Specimen Creek, up over the slopes of Ash Mountain, and down to the Palmer Trailhead, which is just uphill of Gardner and our house. And that's the end of that section. So we started by walking about 3/4 of a mile to a tiny campsite perched on a knoll above the Lake Abundance. And we had a beautiful sunset with reflections on the lake, dinner, watching a bull moose on the far shore, a lovely sunset lighting up the mountains. It was just a wonderful start to this section of the trip. The rest of the day was a pretty mellow downhill trail. Incredible flood damage on both Lake Abundance Creek and Slough Creeks, which made it kind of hard route finding sometimes, because the trail crossed on the other side of the creek was often hard to find because it was buried in sediment and rubble. So this is Slough Creek in this picture. And this was actually a little bit up trail. This was a place where we had to cross the creek at Lake Abundance. So finding where the trail went was a little bit interesting. But we finally worked our way down to Slough Creek, and it was starting to get rainy and super dark purple over the valley below. But we did finally find a campsite, and after a pretty interesting long time trying to hang our bear bags, we finally got them hung and walked back to Frenchy Meadow to watch the sunset, which was just knock your socks off spectacular. In the back there on the left is Cutoff Mountain from a different angle. All in all, a pretty great evening. So the next morning we head out up Bull Creek, which was very, very, very wet. We had delayed a bit, hoping for sun to dry out our tents from the rain overnight, but it didn't peek out of the clouds. So we packed up wet and tried to navigate the washout off trail for a while till we finally found the trail. But once we did and traveled through a little bit of burn area, it turned into just this incredible, lush, wild fairy forest that stretched for miles and miles. And It was incredibly beautiful and fascinating. The smells, there were hundreds and thousands of mushrooms of all varieties, which I'll show you some of those pictures later. We had moose tracks, we had bear tracks, we had even a mountain lion track at one point. And so we're hiking through whortleberries and thimbleberries. So we were totally stoked. The wet bushes just soaking our pants to the bone. But we stuffed our faces on berries and and enjoyed the tracks in the mud along the trail. So nice view from Bull Creek Pass, looking back towards the crazy mountains I had just come from. So that would be the only long view of our entire trip, as you shall see. So not too long after Bull Pass, we started heading downhill, and sunshine came out a little bit to illuminate the meadows of Buffalo Creek, which are just spectacular, emerald green, sparkly. We scanned a lot for animals, but didn't actually see any from up there, but it was sure fun looking for them. So all the way down to the Buffalo Guard Station, which we camped nearby, and that was the last of our sun pretty much for the rest of the trip. We woke up the next morning and, a little break in the rain, so we decided to go, but before long, it was just pouring and pouring and pouring. We waited a little while before trying to cross over Telephone Basin, but no luck. These are our faces at the top at our big view, surrounded by nothing but clouds and wet and rain. And you can kind of see on that left-hand picture how muddy the trail was. So we walked for hours in the pouring rain, downhill to the Coyote Creek cutoff. Had to do some trail finding, and then finally set up camp in a little perch above the creek. So we were able to eat dinner beneath the shelter of a distorted lodgepole pine with this one little tiny patch of dry. Here we are in the rain, in the shelter of this awesome thick lodgepole pine tree. It's completely dry where we're sitting in like a 5-foot radius, and then it's raining everywhere else. Hello. And we're videoing each other. We had a lot of debate about just bailing with the rain. I mean, we'd had 2 days of rain so far. We're soaking wet. It's getting cold, and we thought about heading down to Hell Roaring and hiking out, but ultimately decided to stick with the route, thanks in no small part to Rachel convincing me to persevere and head through to the end, which I'm so glad we did. So we headed down to Hell Roaring Creek. Grateful for the bridge across the narrow passageway for the creek. Lots of celebratory pictures on the bridge. This spot was where a little side creek came into Hell Roaring Creek, which is the water you see on the left. And there was obviously a bridge here that had been washed away. And just again, we were just warm enough and dry enough underneath all our rain layers to be able to enjoy the incredible beauty of these deep forests. I just had no idea how wonderful these long stretches of forests in between burns would be. So that was lovely. Here's Rachel putting on her superhero persona. We had one little break in the rain, and there wasn't actually sun, but there was a little bit of breeze. So we were wafting our tents in the wind in hopes of drying it out, so that we wouldn't have to spend the night in a wet tent. So because we figured we could manage one more night if we could just keep our tents and our sleeping bags dry. So this is starting to head up towards Specimen Creek, and I'm looking back out towards the Northern Range in the park. That pointy peak on the right is Hell Roaring Peak, if you want to orient yourself. So as I mentioned before, the fungus was incredible. Just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of, mushrooms popping out in all kinds of colors and sizes and textures. And this is just the tiniest little sample of what we saw, and we didn't we didn't make it very far very fast because we every time we saw a new one, a new crazy looking fungus, we had to stop and take a picture. So that was fun, and perhaps the craziest fungus that we saw, and unfortunately I don't really know anything about mushrooms and fungus, so we couldn't identify them, but this one was all over the spot where we ended up camping. And I'd never seen anything like this before, and it kind of reminded me of maybe The Last of Us, that TV show, or some sort of fungus that would come and pop up through the bottom of our tent in the middle of the night. It was both fascinating and creepy, in my opinion, at the same time. So, other little jewels on the trail were lots of activity with white bark pines. So, lots of bear sign, lots of sign of squirrels and bears both, harvesting white bark pine cones. We even harvested a couple nuts for ourselves, and oh my gosh, they're so delicious. So then we keep heading up over the shoulder of Ash Mountain in the mud and the rain. So we're nearly soaked to the bone at this point, and no dry socks left. Barely holding on to warmth and dryness as we're walking. So we're pretty glad to be heading out on this day. This is our last day before we hit the trailhead. So last night, before hiking to the Palmer Trailhead, I was laying in the tent wondering what it was that I got from this whole thing, feeling like I only had time and focus for the trail and just staying upright, and not much for contemplation like I had anticipated. And then suddenly, laying there in my tent, finally warm and dry after hiking through rain and cold and listening to more rain on the tent, it hit me. I have gained something. I learned how to love myself again. And it's so simple and so profound, and it almost happened by accident. Without even really trying. I wanted to walk back home to myself, and in a way, I feel like I have. I'm not exactly sure where that love of self went wrong, because there's definitely a time when I very much did. And I was naturally happy. I worked with a guy at an outdoor store when I was in college who asked me if he thought I'd ever be happy. And I said, well, I already am happy. And I love myself, the person I was. And where did that go? I think I just had no frame of reference for the person I am now. And since getting married and having a kid and building multiple careers, I feel like I've been in this wilderness of searching and searching for something. And all this time, I think I was searching for myself. And now, after all these miles, I have found her again. And so I wrote in my journal, "Hello, friend. It's nice to see you again." And am I the same happy, shiny, strong, hiking to the top of mountains girl that I was in my 20s? No, but I feel like I found pieces of her, and like I'm getting to know someone changed and different and maybe even better and stronger. So on this last day hiking out, there were lots of feels. I was tired, I was done, I was ready to be home, but I also had anxiety, the thoughts of the world coming in, who to call, what to put on my to-do list first, all the things I didn't have to think about for almost 200 miles. And I think that drives home one of the most beautiful things about being out here and doing a backcountry like trip like this. Your whole life is distilled down to the trail. Just eating, sleeping, hiking, staying safe, trying to be comfortable, trying to be dry, especially on these last few days, and everything else just falls away. It's not new. This is nothing new, of course, but how we forget how big an impact this kind of distilling life down to the essentials can be. And one thing that always amazes me is being in the middle of nowhere, quote unquote, and being absolutely somewhere. A meadow in the middle of the woods, a trickle of the stream. There's just worlds upon worlds of here and now, of somewhere that we never see or get to experience. It's pretty remarkable. When we got to this sign, it was a bittersweet moment for me because I had hiked up to this point from Gardner in the past and standing there looking down the trail, heading south and wondering what what laid behind that way. And now I know it's a whole wilderness of awesome. So the sun broke through the clouds as we neared the trailhead. There were fresh grizzly sow and cub tracks. There was a fresh wolf track in the mud. And it really felt like the animals were welcoming me home. And what surprised me a bit on the trail was how little I thought about the heavy things while I was walking. I thought I'd do a lot more processing, but really, being on the trail forced me to simply be there, focused on holding my feet together, drinking enough water, finding the trail, keeping calm in a thunderstorm with some success, watching for bears and bear sign. And maybe that's the real lesson, is having the space to step out of all that heavy mind-centered stuff into a very real, very present existence. Just me, my pack, and the trail. And so here I am at the Palmer Trailhead at the culmination of the trip. I finally made it home, and I just want to express my immense gratitude to my hiking partners, the dear friends who joined me on the trip, and to my family for being my support team, and to George for not wavering for 1 minute in his conviction that this was something that I should do. So just a little nuts and bolts. Here is the pile of all the things that I carried. And if I can pull it together, I'll share an equipment list with you. And if I haven't posted one below the presentation, just message me if you want it, and I'll send to you what I took on the trip. But here's a fun little video of putting everything into the pack. Planning the food was quite an adventure. I had to separate things into each of the 4 segments and have all the things ready to go in a box for the boys to bring to me when the next leg came. And so here's a sense of what went into my pack. Those little white note cards are each of the sections. So that's all the food I took on the trail right there. And George made me this fun little video of packing it all into the boxes. So thanks to young George for helping me do this stop motion video. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this recounting of my journey. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Give me a shout out in the Facebook group, or shoot me a message, and I'll be happy to chat more about it. I'll also be at one of the Let's Talk Yellowstone sessions if you want to talk backpacking or backcountry adventures in the park. So thanks a ton.